Ethical judgments. Ethical philosophy differs from the sciences because it is normative or prescriptive rather than descriptive. In other words, ethics tells us how we ought to act or what we should do, while the sciences are more likely to observe how things are in nature or society. Making ethical judgments in utilitarianism. Utilitarianism says that the result or the consequence of an act is the real measure of whether it is good or bad. This theory emphasizes ends over means. Theories like this one that emphasize the result or consequences are called theological or consequentialist. Bentham's formulation of utilitarianism. Man is under two great masters, pain and pleasure. The great good that we should seek is happiness. Those actions whose results increase happiness or diminish pain are good. They have utility. Four theses of utilitarianism. Number 1, consequentialism. The rightness of actions is determined solely by their consequences. Number 2, hedonism. Utility is the degree of which an act produces pleasure. Hedonism is the thesis that pleasure or happiness is the good that we seek and that we should seek. Number 3, maximalism. A right action produces the greatest good, consequences, and the least bad. Number 4, universalism. The consequences to be considered are those of everyone affected and everyone equally. Two formulations of utilitarian theory. Principle of utility. The best action is that which produces the greatest happiness and or reduces pain. Greatest happiness. We ought to do that which produces the greatest happiness and least pain for the greatest number of people. Two types of utilitarianism. Act. An action is right if and only if it produces the greatest balance of pleasure over pain for the greatest number. Rule. An action is right if and only if it conforms to a set of rules the general acceptance of which would produce the greatest balance of pleasure over pain for the greatest number.
Sir, I am Jensen Tijeno, so I am the second reporter. So I'm going to discuss about the application of utilitarianism and the criticism. So applying utilitarianism is we need to make a decision based on holistic view of the happiness, gain and misery ended, averted, and should do so with a strong preference to the higher pleasures and long-term happiness. Complex problems rarely have simple solution, and this one is no different. So the criticism is by claiming the theory justifies treating people unjustly, violating their rights or etc. So an application of theory, the utilitarian theory. So we have A and B. So A is attempt to help an elderly man across the street. He gets across safely. So the conclusion is the act was a good act. So B is you attempt to help an elderly man across the street. You stumble as you go. He is knocked into the path of a car and is hurt. Conclusion is the act was a bad act. So makita man nato nga which is we have a good and we have a bad act. So they are differences na sila kalahian. If you can use 80 soldiers as a decoy in war, and thereby attack an enemy force and kill several hundred enemy soldiers, that is a morally good choice, even though the 80 might be lost. So next is, if lying or stealing will actually bring about more happiness and or reduce pain, Utilitarianism says we should lie and steal in those cases. So next is application of utilitarian theory actual cases. So first, the decision of Coventry during World War II, the decision was made not to inform the town that they would be bombed. So next, the Ford Pinto case, a detective vehicle would sometimes explode when hit. The model was not recalled and repaired by Ford because they felt it was cheaper to pay the liability suit than to recall and repair all the defective cars. So next is criticism of Bentham's theory. Bentham's theory could mean that if 10 people would be happy watching a man being eaten by wild dogs, it would be a morally good thing for the 10 men to kidnap someone, especially someone whose death would not cause grief to many others, and throw the man into a cage of wild, hungry dogs. Stuart Mill's adjustment to utilitarianism. So Mill argues that we must consider the quality of the happiness, not merely the quantity. For example, some might find happiness with a pitcher of beer and a pizza. Others may find happiness watching a fine Shakespearean play. The quality of the happiness is greater with the latter. So next, Mill's quality arguments. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig are of a different opinion, it is because they only know their own side of the question. The other party to the comparison knows both sides. Quality arguments. As between his own happiness and that of others, utilitarianism requires him to be as strictly impartial as the disinterested and benevolent spectator. In the Golden Rule of Jesus of Nazareth, we read the complete spirit of the ethics of utility, to do as you would be done by, and to love your neighbors as yourself, constitute the ideal perfection of utilitarian morality. So, yes, I believe that, I believe this quote, or this is the verse about to love your neighbor as yourself. So we need to love our neighbor even though daghan kay sila mga istorya nimo, or dili na lang jud na nimo sila hilabtan, kay the more nga imo sad sila balusan, so mag-anam pod sila ka hate nimo. So bisan og ila kang pasakitan or ila kang daog-daogon, mas maayo nga imo silang love na lang jud, kay mo nay mas nindot. O di ba, golden rule siya, kinahanglan nga kini nga rule ato jud ning buhaton sa atong kinabuhi. This is criticism of utilitarianism. If I am to bring the greatest happiness to the greatest number, not putting my own happiness above others, that may lead to a dilemma. I live in a neighborhood where 83% of my neighbors use drugs. I could make them most happy by helping supply them with cheap drugs, but I feel uncomfortable doing that. What should a utilitarian do? So, sa inani nga pamaagi, even man nga you have 83% of neighbors, mga silingan nga nag-use of drugs, so kinahanglan pod nga as a human, so kinahanglan nga dili na lang kamo suno. Okay, kay mosamot 83%, may 84% na siya. So kinahanglan nga kanang sa ilang gibuhat dili jud dapat magpa compromise, or dili dapat musuon. So sa inana kay bati manggod siya tanaw, bati siya sundon nga inana nga mga butanga. Bisan pa man og kanang imuhang palibot ba na grabe na kay tanan nga kanang inana nga sitwasyon.
So, criticism of utilitarianism. So, Bernard Williams criticizes the implied doctrine of negative responsibility in utilitarianism. For example, a thug breaks into my home and holds 6 people hostage, telling us he will kill all of us. However, the thug says, if you will kill 2 of your family, I will let you and the other 3 live. With the utilitarianism, the good thing to do is to kill 2 members of my family. So next, utilitarianism plays fast and loose with God's commandments. If lying, stealing, or killing could lead to an increase of happiness for the greatest number, so we are told we should lie, steal, or kill. Isn't that a rejection of God's commands? So, Mill's answer to godless theory of criticism. What is nature of God? Does God make arbitrary rules just to see if we will obey? Does God make rules that he knows will lead to happiness? If the latter statement is true, doesn't it make sense would want us to see our God-given reason to look at this situation? If it will be a true belief that God desires above all things the happiness of his creatures and that this was his purpose in their creation, utility is not a godless doctrine, but more profoundly religious than any other, or whatever God has thought fit to reveal on the subject of morals must fulfill the requirements of utility in a Next is a second criticism of utilitarianism. If one must decide the probable outcome of an act before knowing whether it is good or bad, how can children learn to evaluate acts since they know so little of what consequences might arise from their action? Next is Mill's role of utilitarianism. Mankind must by this time have acquired positive beliefs as to the effects of some actions on their happiness, and the beliefs which have thus come down are the rules of morality for the multitude for the philosopher. Until he has succeeded in finding better, Mill concludes, however, that we should always seek improvement. Next is rights and utilitarianism. Many philosophers hold that we have certain rights either from God nature or from social contract. Can the idea of rights be made compatible with utilitarianism? If ignoring rights brings about more happiness to the greatest number, should we ignore so-called rights? Mill's rule-based view on liberty, having a right to liberty, will bring to the greatest happiness. So last, consequences of unethical practices. Single out of 67 companies out of the Fortune 500 that had at least one illegal act, example, anti-trust, product liabilities, and discrimination. Next, performance of convicted firms were compared to unconvicted firms 5 years after the fraud was committed. Next, convicted firms experience significantly lower return on sales, 3 years lag. Next, multiple convictions are more disastrous. And last, unethical activities can affect long-term performance.